Hi, Kristen Atchison here, and we're talking about memory retention and retrieval. So remember in our information processing model, we had encoding, which is how we get the memories in. Retention is the middle block, right? That's our storage piece of it. And then retrieval is getting the information out. So these are the last two pieces of our information processing model. So how we measure retention is based on retrieval, and there are different ways that we retrieve information. One of the ways we retrieve information is recall. Recall is the fill-in-the-blank test, okay? So this is you're having to pull this information out all by yourself. You're having to just recall the information. You're not given any clues to kind of help you figure that out as much. Whereas recognition is a little bit easier because all you have to do is identify the items previously learned. So I ask you a test question and I leave it as, the answer and I just have you fill it in. That would be recall. Whereas when our tests are multiple choice tests, you have 4 different choices, all you're asked to do is recognize the correct information, okay? The other thing that we'll use to measure retention and retrieval is relearning. Relearning is how much time does it take to learn the material for the second time. Okay, so if you really got the information the day we talked about it in class, in lecture, when you go back and read it in your textbook, it's a lot easier to understand that the second time. The third time that you do it when you're studying, it's even easier because of this relearning, okay? Because you have retention, it's one of the ways we do this. Ebbinghaus famously did this, and this is the Ebbinghaus retention curve. And basically what he did is he was trying to learn a list of nonsensical syllables, and he learned it one day, and then he had to relearn it day 2, and day 3, and number of et cetera, et cetera. And what they found is that as rehearsal increases, as that information is better understood to begin with, that relearning time decreased. So the amount of time that it took to get that information again was a lot shorter because he had already learned it the first time. Okay, so if you've ever did something, you learned it in high school, and you're having to learn it again in college, again, it's a lot easier the second time around because you have some of the retention from the first time. So when we retrieve a memory, again, our memories are held in storage by a myriad of different associations. We'll talk about this a little bit in the brain lecture. And our retrieval cues are anchor points for pathways that can help us find a memory. So think about it as like a landmark, right? If you're trying to go someplace that you've been before, you may not know the names of the roads so much, but you know a landmark. And so that a retrieval cue is kind of like a landmark for a pathway for a memory. In fact, a landmark is a retrieval cue. And so again, the best cues are coming from associations that are formed at the time of encoding. So if you notice something really interesting the first time you went someplace, you're likely to use that as a landmark the next time you go someplace. So again, a retrieval is an example of this. Another thing that we can use is priming. Priming is kind of the activation, sometimes it's done unconsciously, of particular associations in a memory. And we'll talk about this a little bit more here. So priming really kind of awakens these associations we've made. So an example of this is after hearing or seeing the word rabbit, and you're being asked to spell the word hare, you're more likely to spell it H-A-R-E, like a synonym for rabbit, then you would spell it like the hair on your head. And that's because you've been primed by hearing a rabbit or seeing a rabbit. And this can be both done emotionally too. We can have emotional priming as well. But a lot of times in memory priming, it's a way that we can make a memory go one way or another. What kind of information is being accessed? Especially examples like this where we've got a little bit more ambiguity between whether we're talking about the hair on our head or we're talking about the cue fuzzy creature. So again, this activating of an existing memory by a stimulus is priming. So we're activating the spelling of the word H-A-R-E, hare, by showing a rabbit or mentioning the word rabbit. And again, these are done unconsciously. It's not like we're like, oh, okay, well, they said rabbit. I heard the word rabbit earlier, so I bet they're asking me this word. No, we're not doing this consciously. It's just we're primed to remember that information versus other information. Other things that we can use to get memories out, to retrieve information, are the context in which we learn them. So the context in which we learn memories can affect when we can pull them out. And we'll talk about this in another example in a bit. The other thing that's important for retrieval cues, it can be state-dependent memory. And this is that memories learned in one biological state or one emotion are going to be easier to recall when we're in that same biological state or that same motion. Just the way memories are easier to be remembered in the same context as that they were learned in. So the ability to recall is improved when we have the same context for recall as that information was learned in. So in an experiment, they gave scuba divers words to listen to on both land and underwater. And what they found is that when you had the same context for hearing and recall, we got better retention. So we got about 30% of the words recalled and about 40% of the words recalled when the context that they learned the words, whether it was in the water or underwater or on land, was the same as where they were asked to recall them. So if they learned them underwater, they did better recalling them underwater. If they learned them on land, they did better recalling them on land. Opposed to the people that had the different context. We're about 20% for both of them if the context didn't match. And so that's one of the really negatives about having to take our test in the testing center is you're not taking it in the same place that information was learned. And so that can make it a little bit, you've got to have a better understanding of the material to some extent because you're missing that context. You can't look at the wall and go, oh, I remember I was looking at that dry erase board when she said this, and you can remember the answer. So that context can be helpful as well. The other one of those is state-dependent memory. Recall is improved when we can retrieve that information in the same emotional or biological state as that it was learned in. So, for example, it's hard to remember happy times when you're sad or when you're depressed, okay? Because those states don't match. And so it's also easy to see why after a happy experience, people may view the world through these kind of rose-colored glasses because that state, that emotion is affecting our perception of other things. So again, it's easier to remember things when we're in either the same biological state or the same emotional state as when we learned them or when they were encoded. The last thing that we're going to talk about is serial position effect. This is another kind of retrieval cues. We talked about context. We talked about state, which included emotion. Now we're going to talk about the position, okay? So if I give you a list of things to remember, the ones that you're going to remember the best are the items that are on the beginning of the list and the end of the list. The middle of the list, not so much. I personally think that my poor spelling has to do with serial position effect. I just try to memorize how a word is spelled instead of sounding it out. It's unfortunately something I've always done. And so I'm really good at the beginning of the word and I'm really good at the end of the word. But in the middle of the word, the order is unclear to me often. So again, this serial position effect explains why you'll have large holes in your memory regarding a list of recent events, regarding a list of a grocery list, these sorts of things. You're more likely to remember the stuff that's at the beginning and the stuff that's at the end. The last items are recalled really, really quickly because they haven't had to get into long-term memory. They're still in working memory. They're still on our big table where we have all the things we're working with. So those are really, really easy to access because of their serial position, because they haven't had to get really encoded yet. They're still on our working memory table where we can use them. Okay, so that ends our conversation about retrieval and retention. Thanks.